Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're gonna talk about modules and range tab. So basically, we're gonna talk about T1 and T2 and all the logic that I use while I trade. So let's begin first with T1. T1 is simply a break of structure and then another break of structure very closely to it. So the last break of structure to me is going to be the trap. Why is going to be the trap, this break of structure? Is simply because this structure point isn't something valid that has a purpose in the overall market structure. Because most of the time, this break of structure doesn't actually do anything, doesn't take inter-range liquidity. Also because most of the time is actually a small pullback into the overall movement. So his use is simply building up more inducement, so more liquidity for players to take out and the reverse. So that's the logic behind T1, because what also people are ready to see, they first gonna look to this cell after seeing this break of structure. They want to anticipate the short to come. Then what will happen? They will get stopped out and they will see this break of structure. So they're gonna take some longs down there and then I get stopped out twice. So that's why I use this model and why it's actually so important from this strategy. So how to identify correctly this as a trap? As I said, it's not actually a valid structure point. It shouldn't take liquidity, or even after you take it, it shouldn't make sense for the overall bias. Remember that we don't trade only modules, but we trade all the range cycle, because that can happen. Let's say we have something like this. So our range formed from A to B. We can take an actual short from there, simply because we can anticipate price, making a T1 right there. It won't work, something like this, because at the end of the day, that's simply internal range of liquidity being built. So you have to use your own logic. Also, why we use the actual T1? Because our range cycle looks like something like this. And let's say we are onto the 1 hour time frame. And if we move, let's say, onto the daily, what we will see is simply something like this. And as you can see, they're very similar. One is simply more small than the other. That's because fractals. That's why we use T1, right? That inducement is simply the internal range of liquidity. And as you can see, they are both QMs. So that's why we actually use T1. So let's begin right now with defining T1 V1 and T1 V2. So the two variations that price can do. The first one has the break of structure right before the overall BOS. So something like this. Price made the BOS, but way before price created the inducement. So we can actually take a short from somewhere up there and target the low. So that's going to be the first variation of T1 for me. Then the other one is that the BOS happen after the overall break of structure. So the trap is being made after the overall BOS. Then we can take and take, let's say, some short out of here targeting the low at. That's the two variations that came for me when I talk about T1, because are simply the only two ways that this trap can be forming. So let's now move up with understanding the logic behind it, T2. All that counts with T2 is simply the counter behind the failure swing. So simply a structural point that fails. So let's say we find ourselves in a bullish market structure. So we know after each of these break of structure, all these lows should be potentially protected, right? And we know that we can anticipate this low to be protected until it broke structure. If you understand why, it's because this impulse can fail, taking out structure, so that will mean that the low comes to be weak, price can take it and then move up. And only after it, this low will be protected. So this action that price made, I call it a failure swing because price fails to take out this high, making the low weak. So all the T2 is based by this logic. So let's say we find ourselves in a scenario like this. Let's say here we have our internal range liquidity be taken. Price tries to come, then fails to take the liquidity out. Let's say broke even some protected lows inside of this phase. So what that will mean? Will mean that this low is something weak because it doesn't have a purpose. So price will take this thing out, then we'll move up, building up even more inducement. Where the inducement is being built, people will try to long somewhere right there. They will wait the break of structure, and after the break of structure, they will cast some short from there, where they don't realize that equal highs are just being built. So that's the logic behind the T2. So how we can use it? That's for simply mark up at zone and just take it just above the inducement being made. His use is simply building up more liquidity, right? So let's now move up onto the V1 and to the T2 V2. So the first version, we already saw it, is simply price failing taking out structure, making the structural point actually weak. Price shouldn't have a reason to stop inside of it because let's say price already mitigate this obstacle right there. There isn't actually anything stopping price to take out this structure. If you see price slowing and even breaking out structure, that will be a high chance to be a failure swing, so making this low to be taken. And the first version forms only in ranges when we have internal range liquidity. The second version is something more easy and something that I apply more than the first version, because when we are talking about the V1, we can't actually anticipate because we can't actually predict how price is going to fail in the situation right there. We can simply react, and if we react correctly, we are able to catch the first long and then this long right there. So the second variation will be something inside of a range that hasn't actually internal range liquidity been built in. So something like this. We know that we can't actually take a short from there if we don't have liquidity, because liquidity for us is a must. And the POI should be the closest one to the liquidity. If there isn't actual liquidity, price can actually take all of this because it doesn't have a reason to get respected. So what we should wait? We should wait the inducement being made. If we see price coming to something, let's say here we have our main POI, we can wait for price to build up some liquidity. What this impulse will be a failure swing for us, because I will simply trap early traders that won't get the overall movement. So they will try to short from there. What will happen is price will make a failure swing, failing to taking out this low right there, pushing price up higher. And then what they will think, that's a BOS, so trying to long somewhere below there. And they will get stopped out eventually. So that's the logic behind the second variation. Also, talking about the second variation, we have to understand that we don't like to get tapped in on, let's say, POIs directly. We don't like if price comes to a POI straight, because there is actually no purpose for the price to come up straight. We like price to create inducement that can be made close to the POI, or even on some scenarios onto the open, or even on the 50%. So we would like to take something that creates inducement, take it, and then drop. Why? Because we'll build up a trap like this. So that's all for the variation for the T1 and T2. See you through the course.